La siguiente conferencia: Incendios en buques, portacontenedores. Fuera de control es el tema. La conferencista es Charlotte Warr, directora general en Sarnia Training Limited en Londres. Un poco de la hoja de vida de ella: abogada y ajustadora de reclamaciones marítimas en el mercado de Londres, con experiencia en litigios navieros de todo tipo. Comenzó su propia compañía de consultoría y capacitación en el año 2006 y ahora brinda servicios independientes al mercado como autora, capacitadora, y también desarrolla contenidos de e-learning en seguros para clientes en diversas partes del mundo. Charlotte, bienvenida.
Buenas tardes a todos. Tengo 30 minutos para hablar sobre una tópica muy grande, pero muy importante. Pero antes comienzo, necesito verificar algo. Un momento, por favor. Excelente, no hay un incendio en este contenedor. Hablo en inglés ahora para necesito hablo muy rápido. Okay, some slides would be nice. Oh, I'll carry on anyway. Okay. So, container fires. Is it a new problem? No, of course it's not a new problem. I have been in the insurance market in London since the mid-1980s, and I looked back at my history of claims that I've handled and claims that I'm aware of, and I've got a timeline that goes back at least to the mid-1990s, and some of you, of course, may know of earlier claims. So we can think of the DG Harmony back in November 1998, coming through to the Aconcagua, the Hanjin, Pennsylvania. The reality now is that there are more and more happening. I looked at a timeline that was created by somebody on the IUMI Loss Prevention Committee. And between 2000 and 2019, there were 71 losses on that timeline. Even in 2019, we're looking at an average of a casualty once every 30 days. And for the insurers and reinsurers in the room, that is just container fires. So why is it still happening? Well, there are a number of reasons that it's still happening, and one of the most important things to talk about is the fact that it's no one single party's problem, it's no one single party's responsibility. It comes down to money. Very simply, it costs more to ship dangerous goods, typically, than it does non-dangerous goods. And so, just sheer economics means that those goods are not properly declared. It also, I think, probably comes down to time as well, because there is more paperwork involved if you are going to ship dangerous goods. And so if you are a busy shipper, you might want to avoid doing that. The International Maritime Organization Code for the Carriage of Dangerous Goods has its problems as well. There are many gaps in it, many ways of getting around the rules. And of course, chemists are constantly creating more chemicals. And so, particularly if we think about this, oh, there's a nice new chemical. How shall we label it? Oh, well, if it hasn't got a label and it isn't within the IMDG code, we don't have to declare it as dangerous, even though it might be a chemical that makes calcium hypochlorite look like something you'd want to put on your breakfast cereal. Containers, of course, are sealed units. And let's think about it. Well, there's a bit of a container behind me. You can't see what's on the other side of that container, and the whole point is that the container shouldn't need to be opened from one end of its journey to the other. And we'll talk about the sheer number in a moment. And I have certainly seen evidence of clear instructions being given to shippers that if they are sending calcium hypochlorite in dry bulk containers into China, that it must be labelled something else. And I will leave open to you the question of whether misdeclaration or no declaration at all is worse. Oh, I have some slides now. Let's find the one I wanted to talk about. There we are, there's a bit of a timeline. Talked about that. Let's now talk about that. So, I suspect most, if not all of you in the room have heard of the Maersk Honam, and some of you, of course, may have been involved. So this is a container ship, large container ship, caught fire in March last year, and very important to remember, if we remember nothing else, that 5 crew lost their lives. So at the moment, what can the crew do? Well, there should be fire detectors in the holds. Now, I'm sure all of you have at least seen a picture, if you've not actually seen a container ship. There is more to a container ship than the holds. If we think about this hotel, it has about 300 bedrooms, I think, and a number of other public spaces like the one that we're in. Every single room has smoke detectors and sprinklers. But if we think about a typical container vessel, the fire detection systems tend to be just in the holds. So let's assume that a fire has been detected. Well, we could flood the holds with CO2. There might be the opportunity to use foam. But particularly on deck, once the fire has been spotted, then we're talking about manual firefighting. Now, I know that there are some seafarers in the room, and I hope that you got through your seafaring career without having to deal with a major fire, because I cannot think of anything more terrifying. And of course, in the middle of the ocean, the crew have to be their own fire brigade. They're trained, but they are not professional firefighters. If we had a fire in this hotel, I would expect to see the cream of the Ecuadorian National Fire Service appearing quite quickly. I presume they're good. So, what we've got today is firefighting systems in ships that date back at least 30 years. The picture on the right is a picture taken by another crew. So this is a picture of the Maersk Honam burning from space. So we hear about, oh, you can see the Great Wall of China and you can see the Grand Canyon from space. I don't think anybody would ever imagine that you could see a burning container vessel from space. So what are some of the problems with a large container ship casualty? Well, the first problem is actually trying to find somebody who will let you go into their port, the concept of the port of refuge. I want to refer to an earlier case, dates back to July 2012, which is the MSC Flaminia. Now this, again, was a medium-sized container vessel, had an explosion and a fire in the western approaches to the English Channel, and again, people died. Salvors were on board fairly quickly, but then there could be, as we would say in English, described as a fairly undignified pissing contest between various countries. Because we have a wonderful saying in English, the acronym is NIMBY, not in my backyard. And so what happened with the Flaminia was quite a number of countries understandably being concerned about what the impact of letting that casualty anywhere near their coastline would be, saying, you can't bring that here. It took 5 weeks from the point that the crew abandoned the vessel for the German authorities to say, you can bring that ship here. But even then, there had to be some negotiation because the ship had to pass close by the English and the French coasts to get to Germany from where she was. What that led to was some EU work. What we have is the EU Places of Refuge Operational Guidelines. Lars and Ayumi are very heavily involved with it as well. And one of the basic requirements of those guidelines is that countries have to have people who are empowered and capable of making decisions about stuff like this. We're very fortunate in the UK. We've got our SOS rep who is empowered to make decisions relating to any casualty in UK waters. The next set of problems are those faced by the actual salvors. Now again, we know that container ships are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the challenges are getting bigger and bigger. The first challenge is potentially, well, what terms are they going to be engaged on? And I spoke to my colleagues at the Lloyd's Salvage Arbitration Branch, and I asked them, how many Lloyd's Open forms have been used for the major casualties in the last few years? And the answer came back, a list. Well, it certainly doesn't match the 71 on my timeline. But LOF is a very good way of getting the problem sorted out first, and then we'll deal with the niceties later. So the challenges for the salvors, and I've spoken to salvors about this, is, well, the remote location. They've got collapsed and smouldering containers. I wouldn't like to be walking around on those. They're going to be putting a lot of water into the ship to try and fight and control the fire. Well, somebody's going to have to be doing some fairly detailed calculations as to the impact that that water is going to be having on the ship's stability. So is she going to stay afloat in the middle of whatever ocean the process is happening on? Can she be safely towed, and where can she be safely towed to? And it's all very well and very friendly local port saying, oh, you can bring that vessel in here. But what has to be considered, of course, is the practicalities. There's going to be an awful lot of unpleasant firefighting water, chemicals, general yuck that needs to be got rid of. And so the port needs to be capable of dealing with that. The Maersk Honam was still burning a month after the fire started, when she was eventually towed into Jebel Ali. And if any of you are hull insurers or reinsurers, she was pretty badly damaged, but she was chopped up, bits rebuilt, and if you insure the Maersk Halifax, that's her under a different name. Of course, we've already talked about smouldering containers, but the one thing the salvors have got to also deal with is that they may not know definitively what's in those containers. Can the manifests be trusted? Is something going to go bang without them realizing it? And then, of course, good old social media. I do sometimes wonder when I see social media in the aftermath of casualties whether the crew are concentrating more on their social media account than their firefighting duties, but then I wouldn't want to do their job. So, is it a team game or just one person's responsibility? Well, I think you've probably worked out by now what my view certainly on this is, and it is very much a team game. Absolutely, shippers have got to be more honest, but then perhaps they've got to be encouraged to be more honest. Some of that might be the reduction of the price differential between dangerous and non-dangerous goods. Some of it might be just good old-fashioned shaming, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's interesting, I'm sure you've all seen stuff in the press about carriers imposing penalties on shippers that misdeclare. So Hapag-Lloyd have come out and said that they will be fining anybody who misdeclares cargoes, particularly from China, $15,000 per box, US dollars. That's all very well, but if you have got a very badly damaged vessel in the aftermath of a massive explosion and fire, then the first thing you've got to do is make sure that you identify where the misdeclared box was. Now, the TT Club, who insure a lot of the stakeholders in this particular business chain, have very clearly identified that everybody in the chain is a stakeholder. So there's the obvious direct stakeholders, who are the shippers, the packers, the inland carriers, the intermodal operators, the sea carriers, import handlers, and ultimate consignees. But there are indirect stakeholders as well, and of course we as the insurance market are part of that indirect stakeholder chain. But there are others as well, and that could include customs authorities, it could include technology providers, all sorts of things. And we talked a lot about technology over the last couple of days. So what's actually already there and what's being done? Well, SOLAS has got requirements for fire detection, but they are quite old and they are quite generic. The classification societies have notations which will refer to firefighting capability. But there are industry bodies. So some of you may have heard of CINS, which is the Cargo Incident Notification System, and its sort of primary membership is the shipping lines. So this is the opportunity for central information gathering and sharing. If you go onto the CINS website, you will find a lot of interesting information. There's another non-governmental organisation body called, I suppose you could call it ICHA, which is the International Cargo Handling Coordination Association. Again, they're looking to both gather information in and issue guidelines out. Now, we've all heard of the IMDG code, but I wonder how many of us have actually sat down and read the code of practice for packing of cargo transportation units. An equally riveting read, but a very relevant read, and very, very pertinent for this topic. The only difference between the CTU code and the IMDG code is that the CTU code is not mandatory. And so all of its best practice language is no use if people don't bother to deal with it. At least with the IMDG code, people are either ignoring it or working away at how to get round the edges. The P&I insurers, not unsurprisingly, because they bear the brunt of the claims that come in, obviously, on the liability side, are very, very proactive and have been for years and years and years and years. And they issue guidelines, usually in conjunction with CINS, that are just setting out the detail of carrying cargo like CalHypo. That's all very well, but you can only follow the guidelines if you know the cargo you're carrying is, for example, calcium hypochlorite. And in an environment where we've got bigger and bigger container ships, there is just not the time for individual containers to be checked, all of those things to be going on. So, are those ideas enough? Well, they're definitely a start. But as I've said, this is a team game. Better work in one particular area only is not going to resolve the issue. And on, what day are we now? Wednesday, so it must have been yesterday morning, Tuesday morning. Lars was talking about position papers that are issued as part of the IUMI policy work, and there is a very, very detailed and interesting one on firefighting on container vessels. And it starts from the point that I said a few minutes ago. The SOLAS requirements are good, but they're not good enough because they are generic and they don't take into account that a very large proportion of the cargo on a container vessel is actually on deck rather than under deck. And so some of the ideas actually, if you think about it and you think about a container vessel in the same way as you would think about a building, are not necessarily that revolutionary, But particularly if you're thinking about retrofitting some of this stuff to a container vessel, when owners are already worrying about the cost of retrofitting scrubbers, will they do it? But let me talk about what some of those ideas are. Exactly the same way as we think about, obviously, a ship has bulkheads to prevent water moving around, create separate fire compartments, and then particularly within the cofferdams, the walls that separate the compartments, particularly below deck, have the ability to have water running through those cofferdams to cool it. To make sure that the hatch covers themselves can be cooled. And then up on deck, no more reliance on crew basically facing a fire in a stack of containers that could be 5 tall on the deck with a firefighting hose. Have pre-installed, pointing in all directions, firefighting lances. And so every part of that ship can be covered. Have water curtains that will protect particularly the superstructure and the lifeboats. Obviously, if this is going to be done, then all of the water management systems in the vessels must be capable of coping with that. This is not what we call a golden bullet. This is one part of the solution. The best firefighting in the world is not going to solve the problem completely if the other parts of the puzzle are not resolved in terms of other parts of the chain recognizing their responsibility. So, the question at the beginning of my presentation is, or was, container fires, are they out of control? I could have just said yes at the beginning and walked off the stage, but that's not a solution to the problem. The solution is in everybody's hands, including ours as insurers, but the real challenge is it does require money and effort. And particularly for the ship-owning community, I have no idea, you might, what the cost of retrofitting some of this firefighting equipment might be. Lars may well have a better idea. And so it's not going to happen overnight. But I think my last point is probably the most important, and I hope that you agree. Actually, for ships and cargoes being lost, it's just money. But it's people dying, whether it be through container fires, liquefaction, or whatever else. That's the thing that everybody, not just insurers, everybody in the chain needs to focus on. Okay, I've clawed back 10 minutes in the timeline. Muchísimas gracias para su atención.